Okay, so we're gonna look at the Caro Kann, which happens after e4, c6, and now this is similar to the French, except black plays c6 obviously instead of e6. Our play is similar to what the French would be like. So we play d4 and d5, and now we go as similar to the French. We play knight to d2. After knight to d2, however, I don't think black's gonna play something like knight to f6 anymore, because he already wasted the move on c6. He's not gonna play another move c5 anymore. So I think here, black will pretty much almost always play d takes e4, and we'll play knight takes e4. Now, black has a couple options. Black can play bishop to f5, knight to f6, or knight to d7. If bishop to, or sorry, let's go with knight to d7 first. If knight to d7, then we can develop pretty normally. So just knight to f3. After knight g6, we can either play bishop to d3, but that allows him to quickly develop his pieces. So I recommend the line just take on f6. If he takes on f6, we can go directly to c4. Black will play bishop to f5 to develop his bishop before playing e6, so you can get his bishop outside the pawn chain. And we castle. He'll try to get his other bishop out with e6. And now, does anyone have any idea what we play here? We could develop normally with some bishop move, but I think we should have something that's more active right now. Because where do we put our bishop right now? We don't really know. So what would be more active? Anyone? Okay, well we go knight to e5 here. Knight to e5 here, and then, for example, after bishop to d6, we can just play queen to e2, castle, and bishop to g5. We force black to commit where his bishop is going. His bishop goes to d6, then we can pin him on g5. And after, for example, queen to c1, or c7, we play rook to d1. If he goes b5, we go bishop to d3. And white will have good pressure in the center and on the king side with the threats of bishop takes f6 looming. But then if black plays bishop to e7, then we will just play rook to e1, and we'll perhaps play bishop to f4 later on. If black plays knight to f6 immediately, then we also take on f6. And after g takes f6, black takes towards the center in this case, because he wants to use the g file. And in fact, these pawns in the center actually later on will help shield black's king in the center as well. White may play something like c3, black plays bishop to f5, and white can develop with knight to f3. White's main priority here is to make d4 strong, because d4 is the pawn on the half-open file. Black will try to develop with e6, and I'm going to ask you guys right now, what do you think? Should we develop the bishop on this side, or maybe fianchetto it? Yeah? Fianchetto. Why? Yeah, you want to defend the G file because he has a half open G file, and we kind of want to play G3 anyway to stop any threats that he might have on the G file. If he plays queen to C7, then our bishop finds the perfect place on G2. And after knight to D7, we can move our knight away to give our bishop this open diagonal. For example, if he plays bishop to G6 now, then we can castle. We're not really worried about the king side, or him having an open file on the king side, because this open file is really blocked right now, and even if he does manage to open it, I think it's going to be a while before black can start anything big on the king side. Just so you guys know, if black does take on the f6 square with the pawn on e file, then we can play c3. And it's a similar play, bishop to d3. But this time black will castle kingside since his g file is closed. And after, for example, knight to e2, rook to e8, white can start his kingside attack immediately. Queen to c2, for example, g6, and white here can go h4. This time white's going to castle queenside and attack on the king's side. h4. If bishop e6, then we just go h5. If he tries to block us with f5, then we just finish our development, bishop d2, and castle. I still believe that white will have a good attack. Even though right now it seems like this diagonal is fully shut down, we have, for example, g4 later on, even sacrificing a pawn, and we can take on g6 later on with this pawn opening up the h-file. Now, the main line, though, the line that I see almost every time in the Caro Kann is the line of bishop to f5. Bishop to f5 white is forced to play his knight back to g3, which we attack the bishop again, and bishop to g6. Now, do you guys know anything special here? Should we just continue developing with knight to f3 and bishop to c4? Is that a good idea? Anyone? Well, okay, knight to f3, bishop to c4 isn't wrong. I'm not saying that's wrong, but there's a much more active idea. The active idea is to play h4 to try to trap the bishop on h5. Of course, any player who plays this line is going to know that he's not going to get your bishop trapped. So he'll play the move h6, and then you can play the move h5. The whole point of this is not to trap the bishop, because he can move bishop to h7, but it's to gain some kingside space. We gain some kingside space by advancing our pawn to the 5th rank, and after bishop to h7, we can just simply play knight to f3. After knight to f3, black can move his own development, knight to d7. A quick note that after, if you play knight to f6, the problem is then you can play knight to e5. And the center, he doesn't control the center with the d7 square. You can get your knight there first, which makes things very annoying for black. For example, you can have bishop to c4 later on, immediately attacking the f7 pawn. White gains a lot of initiative here. But black will usually play knight to d7, and after bishop to d3, trades, and e6, white will play his bishop to f4. Now this bishop controls a bunch of dark squares in black's territory, and black naturally doesn't want his bishop there, so black will play queen to a5 check, forcing white to move his bishop back, and he will come back to c7. There's another line where black will play bishop to b4, if he wants to develop quicker, but after c3, and bishop e7, and c4, and then queen to c7, white can castle, and after knight g to f6, white will start a kingside attack by playing king to b1, castle, and knight to g4, preparing the move g4 later on. If rook to d8, then we can simply trade off the knights here and play g4, even sacrificing a pawn. You should definitely know what to do after knight takes g4 if you're going to play this line. This is actually pretty interesting. It's not that easy to see immediately, but after rook to g1, the knight can't move back, because if the knight moves back, then... Do you guys see the answer here? Yeah? Right, bishop takes h6. The g7 pawn is pinned. So black has to play the move f5 to guard his knight on g4. And if black plays f5, then we can play queen to e2, attacking this weak pawn on e6. If black plays bishop to f6, then we can take on e6. And after queen to f7, we can take another pawn on f5. Once again, this position gets quite crazy. For example, after knight takes f2, black chooses to take another one of our pawns. And if we try to trap the knight with rook d to f1, black can take on d4. We can take back on d4, and after rook takes d4, we can get our queen out of attack now and play queen to c2. After black takes on h5, then we can play bishop to e3, forking his rook and the knight. After rook takes g4, we take the knight, and white has a knight for 2 pawns. Also here, if black doesn't play f5, black might choose to take on f2, be like, ooh, fork, right? But this time, this gets even crazier. White can play bishop queen to e3, black can take a rook for free, but after queen takes h6, black will get mated. Notice that bishop to f6 isn't a viable defense of the g7 square. It's still pinned. We just take it, which would be quite funny. So you can see what kind of attack that white can have. But in these attacks, the pawn storm is key. You need to be quick with the pawn storm and get your pawns out there quickly. If queen to c7, then after castle, knight f6, we play knight e4 as well. But if black wants to queenside castle and avoid all of these attacks, he can. If black castles queenside, then we will play the move g3 to give our bishop the f4 square once again. Black may trade on e4 and play bishop to d6 to solidify his grasp on this diagonal. White can move his king in to make the a2 square no longer hanging. And after rook to e8, queen e2, knight f6, and white can control the center with c4. Black will try to play c5 to undermine white's d4 square, But white doesn't need to take. White can always just play bishop to c3. I think this position is fine. White has more space than black. It's relatively level, but I think white, as usual, has a little bit of an edge here. So let's go back to the main position and take a little bit of a summary. So here, black has 3 choices after the trading on e4 in the Caro Kann. Black can either play knight to d7, knight to f6, or bishop to f5. If knight to d7 or knight to f6, eventually we'll trade on f6 and just play the moves knight to f3, bishop to d3, and c3, solidifying d4 square, and we will use the e-file, especially the e5 square later on. However, if black plays the move bishop to f5, then we come over here and play h4, h5 to gain some kingside space. And later on, we can start an attack after queenside castling and playing g4. Or if black castles queenside, then white can choose to play the moves knight to f3. And after g3, white can just simply enjoy good space with c4 and d4 pawns in the center.